Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Still at work.
Good evening, everyone. It's a minute after 6, and we've got 30 folks here. I think we'll get started. So let me welcome you to workshop 2 in a series of 3 Complete Streets workshops that will continue through tomorrow night, starting at the same time. We'll begin with a few meeting logistics. Please make sure you're muted at the beginning of the presentation until the interactive session. You can use the chat feature in Zoom to make comments and submit questions. After the presentation, we'll stay online to answer all your questions. And this meeting is being recorded. Our agenda tonight will begin with some welcoming remarks from Matt Hoey, First Selectman of Guilford, and then Sam Garretts, who's chair of the Safe Streets Task Force, will introduce the task force and its mission. And then Tom Tavella of Schmidt Design Group will introduce the Schmidt Design Group team. We'll do a very quick review of the project timeline and meetings goals. We're going to have a couple of brief polling questions and complete streets review. We freshened up the slides for any of you who've been participating all along, so it's still interesting and fresh. We're going to go over a little more of the public input we've received to date because it's still coming in, and we'll explain the breakout session format and then have you break out into the small groups, report back from your small groups, and then we'll preview the final workshop and have closing comments and questions and project next steps. So without further ado, I am happy to present First Selectman Matt Hoey.
Thank you, Holly. And also I want to thank Task Force Chairman Sam Garretts and the entire task force for offering their time, talents, and passion in service to our community. Thank you also to the Schmidt Design Group for their work as our expert advisors to the task force. Early on, the task force had identified the need to bring in some talent, if you will. And the good news is that we had presupposed that would happen, and there was funding available for those resources as well as for some demonstration projects. But most importantly, thank you to all of the interested community members for being part of this meeting. If this is your first, your second, your third, thank you for your engagement. Prior to and during the campaign in 2017, it became apparent that the way we had been addressing initiatives like the Nut Plains Pathway and Shoreline Greenway Trail was problematic. We had forgotten some basic rules of establishing new public policies or programs, the most important of which is effective engagement with the community. Hey, novel concept, right? Listening to those most impacted and potential beneficiaries, supporters, and detractors. That is why I was so happy to see so many residents attend the task force presentation in February, that we'd gotten some interest. Also during that same campaign, I became more aware of emerging concerns over speeding, pedestrian safety, concerns that continue to make their way to my office. And also within weeks of taking office, the Board of Selectmen was presented with 5 separate petitions for construction of new or extending sidewalks, hence the creation of the task force. It was tremendous to see 25 or more people attend yesterday's task force walk around the area south of the Green and have the ability to see and discuss how some challenges might be addressed by some of the techniques you will see tonight. At last night's workshop, we engaged in a great exercise where we discussed concerns in the 7 sectors or sections of our town that our town has been divided into for the purpose of this exercise. You'll see some of that tonight. Ironically, just prior to the walk yesterday, I had a conversation with a resident who was not, as supportive of some of the goals many of us share related to the concept of safe streets. He contended that the roads were built for cars. I have learned from Eric Weiss that, in fact, the first paved roads were built to accommodate bikes, not cars. I also learned last night that although 97% of Guilford residents drive and only 20% bike, one justification for providing bicycle infrastructure is that it encourages more people to bike. And narrowing a car travel lane to install bicycle infrastructure also results in slower driving speeds, both of which make it safer to bike and encourage more cycling. Research published just this month in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that in communities where bike infrastructure was added, cycling had increased up to 48% more than in communities that did not add bike lanes. I'm sure you want to hear from the experts and not more from me. So Holly, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, First Selectman. Appreciate that. Appreciate your comments. I think Sam would like to introduce the task force again.
Right. Yeah. So for those of you who were here last night, I'll try to keep my comments brief. I just want to say that I'm here as a representative of a really powerful group of people. Matt Hoy knew a lot of these folks prior to the formation of the task force. And so he encouraged me and helped me pull together a group of both geographically diverse folks from Guilford. So we represent really all the neighborhoods that we're going to talk about, but also with a real diversity of opinions. We have people who are on the pro side and the con side of many of the debates that Matt alluded to. I'd also really like to highlight that the town officials have been closely engaged with us. Janice Plasiak, George Krall, Butch Hyatt, Mike Mickelay, and Ed Hujanel. It's been great to have them involved, and they've often steered us in the right direction when we started heading down some paths, no pun intended, but heading down some paths that had already been explored before. So with that, let's go to the next slide, and I'll give you a little bit of background on the mission of the task force. So what I want to highlight in this slide is that we've got a 2-pronged mission. And first and foremost, we want to preserve and enhance the scenic, historic, and environmental resources of our town. I think one thing that we all have in common, we may have a diversity of opinions on the task force, but we have a common goal that or a common belief that Guilford is a wonderful place. We all love being here, and we're all committed to keeping it the way that the town that we love. But at the same time, we also agree that there's room to improve in terms of pedestrian, cyclists, safety, mobility equity, which again is a really important point for us. Mobility equity means that the transportation options are open to all, regardless of the form of travel. So being able to get to the train station doesn't mean you have to have a car. we want to do this whole mission, though, as Matt pointed out, we want to do this through a community-centered and transparent process. And I really appreciate your involvement in this meeting and people who've attended the previous meetings. I think the mantra that we want to take forward is there should be no surprises in the process that we're following and the recommendations that come out of it. One really important point that we accomplished early on in our time as a task force was to align the town with the state in terms of passing a complete streets resolution. And you're going to hear more about complete streets from Holly and the rest of the team. We use the term complete streets. You could also use the term safe streets. We use them interchangeably, but complete streets are really, again, acknowledging that streets in our town are a shared resource, not just for cars. We're not a bunch of car haters either, but it's a shared resource. And so we want to accommodate as many forms of travel as we can. And with that, I'll turn it back to Holly.
Great, thanks, Sam. And now Tom is going to introduce us, the consultant team.
Yes, thank you, Holly. Hi, I'm Tom Tavella. I'm the project manager for Schmidt Design Group on this project. I have Phil Schweitzer with me, and I believe Ian's with us as well. And I also want to introduce Kim Gray. She's our Zoom expert. And when we get into any breakout rooms, and if there's any problems, just go back out to the main page, ask Kim, and she will take care of you. She's great at doing it. I also have our transportation planners and public outreach experts with Less Roads Travel, which is Holly, Carolyn, and Eric. And then Beta Engineering is our transportation and civil engineers who make sure with all the design ideas that we come up with that they're meeting the highest standards of quality and engineering so that it can be implemented. Next slide, please. Project timeline. We've been through a lot of analysis already and starting to identify typologies. Now we're into what we're calling our listening phase, where we're doing public engagement through this series of design workshops. We also did one earlier in February that just explained the concepts of complete streets and safe streets. And then we're going to have a series of quick builds so you can actually see how we might implement some of these projects on the ground on temporary installations for a couple days so you can see them and interact with them. And then we're going to go into the adoption and implementation, which is when we start to get our guidelines together and make recommendations. And we will present some of that to the town as well before we get to the final end of that. So for tonight, we're going to review last night's feedback. We're going to introduce our interactive session, which is the breakout groups for the neighborhoods, which is a fun visualization exercise, which is street mix. And they're going to ask each of the members of each of the neighborhoods to present back. Then we'll open the meeting for comments. And then Thursday, we're going to show you the results of past two meetings. And we're going to show you some plans and some sections of what you said with our professional lens on it. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say tonight and then seeing how we can translate that for tomorrow. Holly, do you want to do the rest of this?
Yes, absolutely. So this is our first poll question. We're asking where you live so that we can divide you into breakout rooms based on your geography. So choose a neighborhood based on these numbers. That's good to see some representation from Area 3.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Looking for a few more people to respond. We'll show this map again when we get to the breakout session. So you don't have to memorize. Well, you just have to memorize the number anyway. Not too taxing. And if you're having trouble with the polling, we can automatically assign you when we get to the breakout session. So don't worry. All right, I think we might end it there, Kim. Great. Yeah, still no one from area 2. But we'll
But as we pointed out, there's not a lot of roads up there.
not a lot of roads up there.
East of
that's right.
Quantipogue. It's a beautiful area, but not a lot of roads.
Yeah, got it. All right. Whoops. So this image here is showing the participation we saw in last night's meeting. Again, we didn't see anyone from area 2 last night or area 3, but we had some good lively discussion within the breakout groups, including that you'd like to see connections to important destinations like trailheads and downtown and schools. Again, universally, speeding traffic is a concern for folks. The need for sidewalks, bike lanes, or off-road bike paths. In some areas, fog lines or sharrows might be more appropriate as bicycle infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure on some of the narrower roads. The peaceful and scenic elements should be preserved, and sidewalks are needed around schools, and not wanting to widen roads to keep speeds down. That's a really good point, in that wider roads can actually invite speeding. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The possibility of advisory shoulders came up in our discussions last night, and connecting the sidewalks and crosswalks downtown was an issue that came up quite a lot. Here we go. So it's essential that streets are safe, comfortable, and convenient for travel by foot, bicycle, transit, or car, and for anyone regardless of age or ability. If you're over 50, your peers feel that they have inadequate sidewalks and places to bike, and this is national data. And they almost half have no comfortable place to wait for a bus. So adding these things makes streets complete for all users. So here's our next poll. Oh, I missed a slide, sorry. This slide shows how simply changing the angle of the road at an intersection can slow traffic and reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians at the same time. To go from the angle shown by the blue line to the one shown by the yellow one results in a 4-mile-an-hour reduction in speed and less than half the amount of time for the pedestrian to cross. So the design of a road influences the speed people travel on it. As I was saying before, it can be more effective to make someone feel as if they're going too fast than trying to tell them or ticketing them. So this, why take some of the lane? Sorry, my clicker isn't working properly. I apologize. There we go. Why take some of the lane for bicyclists and pedestrians? To Matt Hoey's point about, everyone drives in Guilford, and why do we want to take some of this lane for bikes and pedestrians when so few people do those things? The answer may come into focus as you decide whether you'd prefer walking on street A or B using the polling functions. This is our second poll. All right, we'll give you a few more seconds there. Maybe for folks who indicated B, you could share with us in the chat why you chose that option out of curiosity. All right. The other point I was going to make on the slide about on the slide was that a third of Americans don't drive. So this does include older adults, as we mentioned before, youth under 16, people with disabilities, and people who can't afford a car. Transportation costs are among the largest expenses for an individual or a family. And a AAA 2019 estimate of car ownership costs is that it's over $9,000 a year for a personal vehicle used an average of 15,000 miles. Communities with complete streets also have stronger real estate markets, and homes located near bicycle, pedestrian, and transit facilities are worth more and maintain their value. So that's some of the economics of complete streets too, in support of them. So as we mentioned at last night's meeting, we have received a lot of feedback from many different outreach activities. And last night we reviewed the responses to the survey of the month questions, which you can find on the project website. We also reviewed the input we received from the community mapping tool and walking tour. The consultant team, have also had many productive discussions with Guilford residents. And these have uncovered important details of what bicycle and pedestrian advocates feel are priority projects for connecting the community on foot and bike. And everything from how school busing is determined to a new intersection design suggestion. Discussions with you and your neighbors also revealed a plan for gaining more roadway for bicyclists and pedestrians. And this concept that you see on this slide from Kim Granbury for a bicycle network that uses only local roads and covers and connects much of Guilford. So just to go quickly over the walking tour again, it was so phenomenal last night or yesterday rather, and I just wanted to point out that it was a sunny day, it was pretty warm, and along Whitfield here in this bottom left image, people were sitting outside and enjoying the street, and it was really heartwarming. And that's sort of the context within which bump outs were discussed. So such as in the top left picture, when you pull the curb out a bit to make the crossing distance shorter for pedestrians, you're also opening up more sidewalk for people to enjoy, as they were yesterday on a sunny day in the spring. And outdoor dining is something that we've certainly learned in the pandemic is very desirable, and is going to be even more so now that the summer months are upon us. Wheelchair accessibility was something that came up. We were really delighted to have Glenn with us, whose lens was a really important one to look at things like curbs and angles of curbs and sidewalk quality and so on. Connecting the sidewalk, there are places where it just suddenly ends, was a concern in several places, even downtown. Sharp turns, speeding traffic, the placement of crosswalks, all came up as issues. And the New England Trail was discussed as really a lovely amenity in Guilford, and trying to connect it better to the street and trail network would really be a great benefit. So with that, we're going to start preparing for the breakout sessions. And I'd like to ask Joe to tell us about road classifications as they relate to design recommendations. And then Eric will tell us about the breakout group exercise.
Thanks, Holly. So this map shows roadway classifications as defined by the DOT. The roadway classifications are used to provide guidance on design elements like lane widths and shoulder widths. And roads are classified as arterials, collectors, or local roads. Your arterial roads would be primarily used to move traffic along. Local roads are more intended to provide access to properties. And collector roads would be somewhere in between, where there's more of a balance between mobility and access. So in a little bit, Eric's going to be telling us about the activity where we're going to be doing some brainstorming. But afterwards, we'll take that feedback and take a look at it in terms of DOT's Highway Design Manual and AASHTO's Roadside Design Guide to see how we can incorporate some of those ideas while taking into account the best engineering practices and guidance. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Terrific. Thank you, Joe, for that. So we're going to be doing a visioning exercise. And first thing I want you all to do is recall which number you chose for your neighborhood, because that's how that's how we're all going to self-select and end up in different breakout rooms. This visioning exercise will be accomplished using a web tool called StreetMix. And you can see the URL up at the top there on this slide. And I'd encourage all of you to jot that down or take a screenshot here so you remember this, so that later on you can go and set up your own account and play around with street cross sections in your neighborhood or around your place of work, or really any street that you've got an interest in. So what we're going to be doing is breaking out into 7 different rooms for the 7 different neighborhoods. There we are. Thank you, Holly. And one person in the room, the room's moderator, will have control over the StreetMix tool. And we'll be talking about different ways to configure the street to accommodate different uses on the street. Before we jump out into our rooms, I did want to point out a few things. The street that you'll be working on, the name of the street up at the top, it'll show you both the width of the street from curb to curb. And I think all of them have some variation. So it'll say something like 25 to 30 feet wide, something like that. It'll also indicate the width of the full right-of-way. So that gives an indication of being a visioning exercise where we want to talk about what's pragmatic, what's practical, but also open up to greater possibilities. So using a bit more of the available space to see what could be accomplished if the curbs were to be moved back a little bit. With this asterisk that once you start moving the curbs, the cost of a project tends to go way up. Then you start talking about things like having to move storm drains, or maybe there's a utility like a sewer line, for instance, that might have to be moved as well. So we don't want to restrict your vision in this exercise, but also to keep in mind the practicalities involved in staying within the curb versus moving away from the curb. So with that proviso, I think we should move to the next slide and move ourselves into our 7 different rooms. Holly, can you, or Kim, move us into that area?
Yeah, the breakout rooms pop-up should show momentarily.
They're all open. If you see it at breakout room in your taskbar, you should be able to jump into the room that corresponds to your neighborhood. And if you don't see it, that's okay. I can manually move you over. Just let me know if you need help. Holly, you want to stop the,
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had lively discussions. I'm going to share the presentation again. So now we are going to ask you to report out from your groups. I'm not sure, actually, our group 4 forgot to designate someone as a spokesperson. Would you like to do that, Jim?
You want to go in order?
Let's go in order. Yeah, I was jumping ahead. Sorry. Oops,
Very good. You're still jumping.
still jumping ahead. Here we go.
For someone in my group, would you guys like to chime in and talk about the different options that we explored?
I don't know if Tarma, if you want to speak up, but I think our conversation was really getting good there. And then
It
we
was.
and then we got kicked out.
Yeah.
No, I think that we were having a really good discussion about Sharrows and maybe that being a good option on Long Hill north of Route 80. But I think our discussion led to it may not being enough, especially around the schools. A lot of families walking their kids to school, or at least encouraging that. You know, I don't think that we came up, we were trying to figure out if getting a bike lane and if that would be, I guess, aesthetically pleasing to how things are in North Guilford, and kind of keeping with the rural look of everything up here. Tarm, I don't know if you want to add anything, but like I said, we were really onto something there. And
Ditto. Thanks,
Yeah.
Holly.
Yeah, I think we started getting even towards a side path, which will allow people to bike and walk to school. And if it's made out of something like stone dust, which is more natural looking than an asphalt or a concrete, it might be a little bit better pill to swallow for some of the residents in the more rural areas. Did I get that right?
yeah, I think so.
Absolutely. And Tom, you did mention that because of the natural features not being known until until you go in and assess, even if crosswalks were placed as ways to make connections across the street, even if it is a little bit awkward, I believe that, crosswalks are even maybe slightly awkwardly placed crosswalk with this solution or a similar solution in mind is better than a better approach than none at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we go down these roads, you're going to see that these different treatments are going to have to change because of obstructions and other things. But it's a fun exercise to look at and understand what you might be able to do with your streets. Okay.
If you're done, we'll call in a spokesperson from group 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
no spokesperson for group 2.
Oh, there wasn't a group 2. Okay, group 3.
Eric here. That was the group that I was with. I didn't ask anybody to volunteer to report. Does anybody from our room want to? You can unmute yourself. Hearing none, I'll go ahead and do it. This was really fun. It's a little bit challenging because of the varying width of Long Hill Road in this area and the varying width of the right-of-way, as well as the curb-to-curb width. But because there were so few of us, we each got to do sort of individual cross sections, and everybody wanted to drop in bike lanes and see how that would work. We also played with putting in a side path along the side of the road and talked about sidewalks as well. We were fortunate that Janice was in our group. There is a sidewalk along a portion of Long Hill Road in area number 3, and it connects from New England Road, where the high school is, down to the playing fields. But we talked about, the notion of extending that sidewalk further south as well to more, to further encourage or at least make possible walking to school. I thought overall it was a good exercise for us.
Great. Or was there any discussion from group 3? Any further discussion? Anyone else want to weigh in?
I'm sorry, I haven't been, I don't know if it's been talked about in terms of the density of the schools and the school population. And with Baldwin Middle School, here's the all district middle school. So people coming from very far in part, but it is a large number of students in the high school. If that brings a focus to more of a foot or skateboard or bike travel to each of those large schools versus somewhere where there's a smaller school or no school. It's a question.
Well, I think it's a legitimate one. And I think you're right, Polly, to bring that up. If we're talking about, one geographic area where there's a greater number of kids who could potentially be walking or biking to school, I think that makes it an area that lends itself well to, if nothing else, a pilot project to see how that would work and how many families would take advantage. I guess I'm not advocating this, but anticipating the counter argument would be that because it is an all district middle school, that means there are more school buses coming in from all corners of the town, which creates an additional hazard. And that would be an issue that we'd need to address as part of this conversation.
So if I can interject, even though I wasn't in that group, I raised 2 kids that went through the high school, and I lived between 77 and Long Hill Road, about a half a mile from the high school. And I can tell you on one hand, the number of times my 2 kids walked to or from the high school because there was no good pathway. And, we didn't frankly want them walking across that area without having a way to walk across. Redcoat Lane, if anyone's familiar with that, our development came out right there, and you get this non-existent walkway path from there southbound to New England Road, and then crossing over New England Road to get to what calls itself a sidewalk. It just is a really bad circumstance, unfortunately.
What road did neighborhood number 3? I know we focused on a certain road. Did you focus on one road or multiple roads? I was just curious, and if you recall what the width was, because I think that was a surprise for us in group 4. I was just curious.
Yeah, we were looking at the portion of Long Hill Road that goes through area number 3, and the curb to curb width varies from 26 feet up to 34 feet.
One quick thing to interject with regard to schools, and I don't know how many students actually do this, some have done it, and I've certainly heard discussion from parents, is the connector trails through the woods that are all east of Baldwin that go directly to Bittner Park, and that some folks has used those, and then that once you get to Bittner, it's a whole nother area there that you have access to. Just another way to think about it in terms of going through the woods a bit and then out to that other road.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Polly, there's a new neighborhood going in north of Baldwin. I'm not the expert on this, but there's going to be a path from the neighborhood down to Baldwin. So it's another way to connect, completely off-road. And I would say, kudos to, I think George Kroll was probably involved with it. I'm not sure exactly who, gets the credit for helping to suggest that, but it's a really safe way for kids to get to Baldwin.
Great.
And a great point about trails connecting important destinations as part of your whole transportation network. We often forget about them, but you do have a beautiful trail network in Guilford. Shall we hear from group 4? Jim, was I successful in volunteering you to be our spokesperson? Jim Busby?
I'm happy to do that. Feel free to jump in, any one of us, because we had a good group of people in ours. The area that we looked at specifically was Nut Plains Road with a width that varies from 24 to 31 feet and a right-of-way that varies from 50 to 60 feet. So initially we started playing around with the narrowest section, 24 feet. And by playing around, I think we tried to think about adding a 2-foot width on either side, maybe a stripe or an advisory shoulder that would give comfort to the bicyclists or pedestrians. Although probably what most people would have liked would to have a dedicated bike lane. And then we started thinking, do you put it on one side? And if you do, what kind of problems does that cause? So we talked about that, and then we started talking about existing conditions and what might we be able to do to give comfort to the people that are walking or riding. And so we came up with sharrows, bike prints, the fog lines, advisory shoulders. But what was most interesting is we started looking at right-of-ways. And we had a nice suggestion about in dangerous areas. For example, on Nut Plains, you've got an area right across from the dog park. You've got another area that's just north of Half Mile Road. Both of those areas are narrow and they have a tough curb. So what do you do for that? If there was a possibility of gaining a little bit more through a right-of-way, I think that would be a nice solution. So that was mentioned. And then over on Podunk, there was a mention about vegetation that encroaches and gets in the roadway and presents problems, especially for young people, and thought, well, that's a simple solution potentially about just keeping that vegetation down. But I guess Nut Plains was tough because there are several places where the sight lines are very difficult and they're dangerous areas to pass. And we talked about speed reduction or enforcement as possible solutions as well.
Thank you. Helen, did you want to weigh in here too? Or anyone else from group 4?
I just want to say that Jim did a fantastic job not knowing that
Great.
he was a spokesperson ahead of time. I just need to, he just captured it great.
Thank you.
I defer to Jim on this.
Yeah, okay. John, you had some comments too about the curb, and wondered if you wanted to mention that.
Yeah, sure. I'll mention the curb. I just want to second. We lost. We got thrust back into the main room. So I just wanted to second one comment that Jennifer was making right at the end, which was just going back to speeding. You know, a lot of these solutions are trying to address speeding with cars, and I think it's just helpful to go back and remind ourselves of that, and you know, as we kind of try to reconfigure the roads or talk about, you know, where we paint lines or not or whatever. But the roads on Nut Plains don't have any curbs, as do a lot of roads in Guilford. And the problem with that is and someone brought up, you know, that if you do have curbs, it can be a problem for bicyclists to try to get off of the road, or pedestrians, because that can be a problem. And the benefit of curbs would be potentially to reduce the amount of breakage of the asphalt that you get on the side of the road, which makes it hard to bike or walk on. So you kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place there. But yeah, those are the only two things I'd like to say.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from group 4?
I would comment a little bit. I not only drive Nut Plains and Goose Lane, I bike it, I walk it. In those areas on the right side of the road where it floods, whether you're walking or biking, it forces you either further onto somebody's yard or into the roadway. And if you're on a bike, it forces you sometimes as much as into the other lane of oncoming traffic. So Nut Plains, Goose Lane, that whole length is going to be a challenge for sure. And I personally have witnessed bicyclists nearly getting run over by cars. So just, the speed thing is a problem, and I'm not sure how you're going to calm that one down. But I mean, just improving the road on the edge would be a plus. So you're not driving in broken up asphalt.
That's a great point. Thank you for substantiating that, bringing it home. Well, if there's no more comment about group 4, let's move on to 5. Do we have a spokesperson for neighborhood 5?
We did not choose one. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer. Kim, you did a great job last time. I don't know.
I'll take a stab, and then anyone else from group 5 can jump in. We are looking at Moose Hill, and this road is very narrow. It's 10 feet in some sections, and it only goes up to 24 feet at its widest. The right-of-way is massive. It's 50 to 70 feet. Maybe not in every single section of Moose Hill, but that seems to be in general, 50 to 70 feet. But our group, I think we had consensus around not wanting to widen the road at all, even when it was at 10 feet wide. We would rather, because the cars are going fast on that road, in a large part due to the straightness of the road. So I think where some of the other roads in Guilford have some curves and bends and hills, Moose Hill is fairly straight. So putting in, forcing we talked about a 9-foot wide travel lane for the cars, going down to 9 feet with like white fog lines delineating better space for the walkers and the bikers. And then we also talked about another idea. When you look at Moose Hill as a pretty north-south road, and on one side is a bunch of cul-de-sacs, and then on the other side, there are homes, but it all backs into Westwoods, I think on the east side of Moose Hill. There's also at least 3 trailheads that into Westwoods that I could think of. There's one on Moose Hill, there's one up on the north side off of a cul-de-sac, and then when you loop up and around, there's one off of Peddlers. So the idea floated there would be to do some sort of off-road pathway, footpath. We also, similar to what North Guilford talked about, we talked about it being, narrow, gravel, crushed stone, something that wouldn't be shoveled, something that, but would be off-road, something that a person, a road cyclist would probably not want to get onto. But a family with kids or someone going a little more slowly on a bike or walking and running, they definitely would want to hop onto that. And it would connect all these great trailheads as well, and neighborhoods, all the little cul-de-sac neighborhoods. So anything else to add, group 5?
Sounds like you nailed it, Kim.
Yeah, that was great, Kim. Yeah, perfect.
All right, group 6.
So I had a great conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Simmons, and I can provide a little bit of a recap, but feel free to jump in if I forget anything. We were focusing on Lover's Lane, which is pretty consistently 20 or 21 feet down the length of it, with 57 to 61 feet of right-of-way. And we talked about the north end being a little bit trickier to bring in some pedestrian and bicycle accommodations, mainly because you have some sharp curves and rock outcrops. So up at that end, one option might be to implement sharrows to at least alert drivers that they should be looking out for bicyclists in that area. But further down south where it gets a little bit easier, we initially talked about advisory shoulders being one possibility, but we ended up going more towards a side path on the west side of the roadway next to the fairgrounds. We also talked about making it a one-way street as one way of helping to accommodate the side path. And the adjacent street, Union Street, could be a one-way pair. But regardless of what's done on Lover's Lane, we thought that Union Street could be a good candidate for bike lanes. Let's see, we also talked about providing some accommodations for bicyclists and pedestrians in the area of the fairgrounds. So if there was a bike rack or bench, that might be something that gets a good amount of utilization. And I think that covers it.
Great. Wow, you guys had some really good ideas. Lots of good ideas. What about group 7?
I
Yep.
can take a shot at it if no one else does, or feel free. So one of the things that I think came across on all these groups, and it was, you know, front and center in group 7, was the lack of perception of what the right-of-ways really are by the residents in the town. And I think that's where a lot of these conflicts have come up in the past that we don't want to repeat. And I think that some way of balancing that, you know, technical fact with the reality of, you know, on Whitfield, we talked about some of the houses are physically built in the right-of-ways because they've been there that long. It's something that we need to be thinking about across the communities in any restructuring or thoughts of restructuring. The other side of it is, you know, this, you know, painting lines on the road, certainly as an experimental basis on some of these demonstration things to see how they work and maybe do some statistics, which wasn't talked about in this, but, you know, we could get statistics with traffic instrumentation to see what the road speeds do as you do some of these experiments along the way. So we have something more concrete to say, hey, you know, we narrowed the road with these fog lines or with these bike paths or whatever, and the speed of the traffic dropped by 27% down to, you know, X from Y. But I think that, you know, this miscalibration between people's perceptions of their space and the physical roadways and shareways is something we really need to work hard on to make this project successful. Anyone want to add more to the discussion? We put some bike paths and other things in, but again, it was sort of each one of these was butting up against the reality and the perceptions.
But Glenn, in our group, we were able to have 2 lanes of traffic, a bike lane and a parking lane on that section of Whitfield Street that we were able to accomplish with lines, and at some point where the roadway narrows, a sign that would be able to be put up that, you know, road narrows ahead. The particular route that we were talking about, we had 9-foot drive lanes instead of 10-foot drive lanes, a 5-foot bike path and a 7-foot parking path. And Matt's point was made also that the bike lane is there, and if not being used, cars can scooch around each other by infringing on the bike lane when nobody's in there.
Absolutely.
I just also wanted to add, and I don't think Stephen got to finish his thought, but there are some places where too, we have the sidewalk is separated by a green space from the road, and there are trees there, and it's a much friendlier way to go if we can continue to maintain that.
Absolutely. You don't feel the car brush by you as it speeds past from the sidewalk then.
I think we were all also unified in the idea that we need to do various things in different stretches of the roadway, all of which slow traffic down.
Absolutely.
That seems to be a universal sentiment across all of our groups. And in group 4, we also talked about the just how surprised people were to see the right of way on a map. So that was a great point, Glenn, you made.
I might be sitting in a right of way right now if we're doing 50 feet.
That was why when I built my house, I put it back 30 feet from the road.
I didn't have that choice.
While neighbors on either side of me and across the street are within 10 feet.
Holly, if I can add to that, I think one of the things that you've got to worry about in all areas of town is not relying on the GIS to give you a right-of-way width. And I think that's one thing that's going to have to be identified on a much clearer basis before you propose any demonstration projects. Because, for example, on Whitfield Street, it said there was a 60 to 66 foot right-of-way, when it's clear to me in the section that the back of curb to back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk is closer to the 50-foot range. And 60 feet is far beyond what probably the town has any right to be involved with. So if you're going to go to an area in a neighborhood, you've got to do that basic research first and deal with the actual physical conditions before you start talking about something that might go in back onto private property.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And I think we're hoping that with this exercise, we could see what it meant to be staying within the curb to curb width, right? So now we've seen that if we were, we haven't proposed anything for our demonstration projects that goes outside of the existing curb to curb width. So we wanted to make sure to preserve the, the roadway, the roadbed that's there for our demonstration projects, but this is a little bit more of a visioning exercise. So that's why we thought to include the right-of-ways as they are in the data that we
Right,
have.
but I think that's what caused so much of the controversy on these other things in the past years, was the fact that in a lot of these places, the right-of-ways are as wide as are being portrayed as, but the perception from the residents is not that is a legal right-of-way. And so we need to balance those two tensions in a way that is productive, as Stephen pointed out.
And Holly, I just add that many of the streets in town do not have formally established highway lines, whether it be stone walls, whether it be subdivisions that have been approved with a highway line established at that point in time. On a number of streets, the basic rule was to set it 25 feet back from the center line of the existing traveled way, depending upon the roadway classification. So again, it's not only a perception of where the highway line is, it's the legal limit of it. And before you start approaching it in your public and transparent process, that needs to be understood before any proposal is brought before the public, to make sure that you don't antagonize them unnecessarily. And again, this is 20 years as a town engineer in an adjoining town telling you that.
Much
Absolutely.
appreciated and loud and clear.
Yes.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Stephen.
Are there any other questions or observations people would like to share?
I just want to say one other thing about the street trees, because in some cases we had some very aggressive pruning as a result of storm damage and power lines. And, it is a nice buffer on the street. And I would like to see, that's an amenity that is more accessible than some other things. And so I just want to consider that.
Yeah, there has been some good replanting too. I mean, along State Street, there's been a lot of trees that have reached their life limits. And on Central State Street downtown, they put in like 15 new trees in the last year to replace a lot of them that have been cut down.
And they're all native too, which is nice.
Yeah, and we can make recommendations on the proper ones for different situations. You know, if there's power lines and or non-power lines and in tight situations, we can make those recommendations as well.
Great. Well, if there's, we'll still have more time to comment. We'll stay here as long as folks want to chat, but thought I'd give you a little teaser for tomorrow night's workshop. Tom, do you want to speak to this slide?
Yeah, well, this is just a typical cross section, and what we're going to do between now and tomorrow's meeting is develop a series of plans and cross sections like you see here, the typologies for the roads that we discussed, and we can show in a preferred way we'd love to see the road designed, or if it's in a constrained manner like we see on the right hand side. And you know, it's just a graphic here just to show you how this will be presented for tomorrow. And we're looking forward to some open discussion on what we come up with for plans and cross sections tomorrow, based on your input and our professional advice as well.
And I had a just kind of an overall question, or maybe a request for tomorrow. Is there was a presentation, I want to say a month or two back, and it invited us to take a look and go through some of the presentations and different options that are available when it comes to getting people to slow down. There was paint, there was moving streets so that you might go this way and that way. And I see a lot of what we could do with the current street right now, or adding a bike lane or a buffer, but are we gonna work with any of those other ideas at all? Because I feel like the overarching thing in every single group is speeding and sight lines. So I feel like it's almost a cost-effective way, just as well as just being effective on its own to try and slow down folks.
Yeah, the plan views are going to be a lot easier to show those type of treatments tomorrow. So
Okay.
we will do that, and as people have mentioned, just even narrowing the travel way itself from 12 to 10 will have some effect on slowing down traffic. But then you throw in things like normalizing a radius around an intersection. They'll tighten it up a little bit as long as buses and trucks can still make it. But it slows down that whole thing, because you have a lot of situations out in different areas that cars can go pretty quick around the corner, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. And that's just not safe for anybody.
And would anybody on here know what are the Guilford rules around pruning your own trees, bushes, greenery, so that you are not encroaching on a road? Because that's, in our group, we talked, that's a huge problem. And that was a question that I had. I was just wondering, is there an ordinance at all anywhere where people are required to trim back their trees so that they're not, because you're on a bike, you're walking, you just get caught right there and there's a car coming, so.
I think your tree warden would be the person to answer that, and he's not on the call, unless Janice or someone else knows. I personally don't.
Yeah, we do encourage people to maintain their property frontage, even if it is within the right of way. And certainly our public works crews end up having to do a lot of that roadside maintenance and cutback, unfortunately, where there's either vacant properties or a lot of corner properties. One property owner will only maintain one side, the front side, and not the side yard along the edge of the road. So encouraging folks to do that is welcomed. There is if it is a tree in the right of way, it is a town tree, and removal of entire removals of trees is not not allowed, but certainly any help people can do in their neighborhoods to maintain, you know, the frontage of their property along the roads is encouraged and welcomed, because it's not just for safety of the traffic. There's also, you know, raking up leaves in the gutter line, because then it creates stormwater problems with all this stuff getting into drains and things like that. So it is a town-wide problem, and if there is a neighborhood group, or, you know, that can encourage their residents to do that, that's welcomed by the town for sure.
I'd also add that if anyone has specific areas where they feel that need attention, that they should make those known either through Janice's office at the town engineer, Public Works, or my office in the selectman's office. So and we'll address it, as we have in the past with some, particularly Whitfield Street's one of those where we had some complaints about the hedges encroaching on the sidewalk, and we've dealt with that in a couple of spots. And we'll continue to respond when these things are brought to our attention.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Be careful what you ask for.
But
Hey,
you know,
Glenn, I don't do the work. There's somebody else that actually does the work.
But again, I think just making it part of our education process to get people, I think a lot of people don't even think about the hedge that they've got on the corner there that is actually creating a lot of dangers. And if we just get people to start thinking about those things, we might get a few fixed.
Tim, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the things that I've had some conversations with Bob Yarrow, who I don't think is on here tonight, but there's this whole courtesy code thing that I think the task force may have talked about, which is an education process, which talks about, you know, slowing down, you know, not speeding, and a whole series of behaviors, and that we would like to see from our community. And it's clearly can extend to things like, if you see something, say something, that you see something that's bothersome, say something. We will address it.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Steve Dudley again.
Steve.
The Whitfield Street group did talk a little bit about 9-foot lanes, and I would caution, based on the roads that have been discussed, that 9-foot lanes, given the mixture of traffic that is on most of those roads, is probably not appropriate for any of the collectors or anything along those lines, as shoulders are being maintained and center lines being maintained. So I think we ought to be in a position where we're at a minimum of a 10-foot lane and no smaller than that, perhaps except on a local residential road.
I agree. I did some work down in Tennessee and that bit me. So I learned my lesson. So thank you.
I just wanted to add that on Wild Rose, myself and our neighbors were reaching out, and we've been doing almost like a mowing cutback, kind of spread the word, you know, let your neighbor know. And we mow or help clear other people's areas who, you know, say it's okay. So we're trying to maintain both sides of the road, you know, maybe 2 feet off the road. It doesn't take much. And just a little extra mowing and leaf clearing, and you have a safe spot to walk and step off of the road onto. So it's picking up steam a little bit on Wild Rose. So hopefully other roads can join us.
It's great.
It's great. I like that concept. It's like a stewardship concept, or what do they call it? Sometimes you see by the side of the road, adopt a highway, or that's really cool.
Yeah, Portland, Oregon has a great rain garden stewardship program for their biofiltration swales and rain gardens in their roads that we can refer to as well.
And I'd like to ask another question about kind of philosophy, because as a pedestrian, I'm often feel somewhat safer if there is a fog line, a white line, and I'm on this side of it. But we don't seem to be in favor of painting them in a lot of places. And I was just wondering what determines when even we have a center line, you know, or not. And anyone has a thought on that?
Joe?
Yeah, I would say, probably really depends on the width of the shoulder. If you're on a narrower road and it's 1-2 foot shoulder, I don't know that it's providing too much benefit for pedestrians. But, when you have a little bit wider shoulder, I think, that's where you're looking at having some benefit of getting a little more comfortable. So, on a lot of these streets, it comes down to the available width and whether there really is a benefit of providing a shoulder given the cross section of it.
I would tend to argue the opposite, honestly, on that. On the narrower roads is where it's more beneficial for the pedestrians and the people walking, and it makes more of an awareness for the drivers that they should pay attention and slow down because we're trying to keep things safe.
I absolutely agree. Even if it's just a foot, it makes people aware that their lane is narrow and there are other people there.
I also had a reaction to that first exercise when we chose the dotted lines or the straight lines. And I chose A, but I must say, as a bicyclist, it worried me to see the dotted lines because I was thinking, oh, a car is just going to come over because it's looking like something where you can pass. So there is that thought of the straight line makes you feel like there's a little bit of an identification, even though often the shoulder is never big enough.
Yeah, that was kind of a hybrid because the dotted line is an advisory shoulder, which is much wider, so bikes and pedestrians can use it. And cars have a very narrow travel lane in the center, but when there's not a bike or a pedestrian in it, they can move over in case there's two cars coming. It's a new concept that people are adopting across the country. And you guys would be cutting edge if you started doing that. So what we want to do is hopefully do one demonstration project in town for a weekend or a couple days that uses advisory shoulders so you can try it out and say, yeah, that's not going to work here in Guilford, or wow, this is better than I expected. And that's the reaction we want to get out of these demonstration projects.
That's great. I'll try it.
Okay.
Fantastic. Well, we are past 7:30, but we're also happy to stay on if folks want to. We want to also be respectful of your time. As we hope you will show up tomorrow night as well. We're saving some of the best for last. So please do join us again. Again, the quick builds, the demonstration projects are going to be happening over the summer, and we will have another public meeting after we do the demonstration projects and incorporate all of this amazing feedback we've received from all of you. So I want to thank you all for your time and
one
for
question
your thoughtful points.
on the demonstration project. Maybe this will be talked about tomorrow, but the process for deciding where and what they look like, is that a public process, or is that something that's going to come out of somewhere else, shall we say?
We've made some recommendations to the police commissioners and they have to approve them. And the idea, Glenn, is we're trying to give you a diverse type of project. So it's not all the same and just scattered about. We want to try to do extended bump outs in some spots. We want to do the advisory shoulders in some spots. We'd even love to try to do a transit stop somewhere that's accommodating people of all ages and abilities. So we have a couple of that have been set for right around the green, some bump outs and some reconfiguring of some sidewalks and things. And we're hoping to do that during a summer festival or something like that, so we get a real lot of people using them. The other ones have not been set at this point, so we just have the two at this point that are right around the green.
I can add to that, Tom.
Yep, please.
Glenn, specifically to your question about how the public's involvement in the types of projects and the siting of the projects. All of the ones that we've been proposing and talking about with the police commission have all come out of conversations we've had with the task force and feedback we've gotten through the wiki map, which has been used by, well, Holly can tell us how many people have been in Guilford have been putting in comments using this wiki map tool.
We're
So,
getting close to 150, I think.
so this is where we've been getting all of our ideas. It's definitely a grassroots endeavor.
Right, and if I might, in addition to the police commission, Glenn, the task force and the Schmidt Design Group has accommodated some input, very specific input from one portion of the community as it relates to one of the proposed projects. And as a result of that, the task force has backed off and is going to work with that constituent group relative to the suggested project. So yes, there has been some community involvement.
Holly, if I could add on to that, I know Matt's referring to me at the moment, so that's okay. But what I would suggest is, again, relying on my many years of municipal service, adjoiners are important stakeholders in this, and adjoiners should be contacted initially before anything's proposed in any public forum whatsoever, in order to ensure that you have buy-in for whatever you're proposing and it's not an adverse impact on that, whether it be in North Guilford, downtown center, or whatever. That's a surer way to ensure success than going in about it without contacting them first. And that's
Absolutely.
20 years of experience.
No, I couldn't agree more. That was part of why I asked the question, is because I'm just trying to understand the process and trying to do whatever I can from my perceptions to make it a success.
Appreciate
Thank
that,
you.
Glenn.
That is
and
much
thanks,
appreciated.
Stephen.
And what I would add, Glenn, is, we have the option to do more quick builds. And so if you have an idea that you'd like to bring to the group, there's steps we would go through to get that done.
Well, like I say, I don't want to duplicate anything that's already perceived, but just trying to understand what is going on out there and what kinds of things you're looking at was where I was coming from.
Oh, so I think, Glenn, the answer is there are no bad ideas. If you have them, please share.
I'll think about it.
Well said. Yes, and thank you, Steve, also for that important feedback and reminder. Much appreciated.
Yes.
Sam and/or Matt, I have a couple of questions about the article that was in the Guilford Courier last week, specifically on the budgetary numbers. Would this be a forum to ask those in, or should we do something different with that?
Certainly, Mark, go ahead.
The article had alluded to $300,000 for the Schmidt Design Group for this project.
I don't know what the article said, so
Yeah,
I think it's less than 300.
Yeah, that number was incorrect.
There were $350,000 allocated to this to the task force at its formation.
Okay, and
Great.
where is that money coming from? Is that Guilford taxpayers?
Absolutely.
Okay. Were there RFPs that went out?
Yes,
there were, Mark.
Yep, I can talk a little bit to this. So we put out an RFP/RFQ. I still don't really know the difference, but we received 5 bids. We narrowed the list down to 3, and we conducted a small group of us conducted video, Zoom interviews with 3 teams. They were all really good, but Schmidt Design Group really impressed us, especially with their knowledge of Connecticut and working with this town. I do want to mark that. So the winning bid was $210,000. So it wasn't the 300,000. I don't know where Jesse got that in the.
Yeah, it was kind of honestly 210,000 is still an alarming number.
Well, you should have seen some of the other bids. There was quite a range. So
yeah, and again, I don't know the mechanics that are that have gone in, that are in the background of this. So is this something in our regular town budget Or
No,
is-
Mark, this was money earmarked from some of our surpluses that was dedicated to this and several other projects around the community. So this is formally collected tax revenue, if you want, because it came from our unassigned fund balance.
Okay. So this, but the total money that we have is 350,000 for the project entirely. Anything above that for construction or things like paint, signs, anything like that, that has to be put into a new budget for the following year?
No, there are a variety of ways to fund this, Mark. We have a fund balance that is in excess of our targeted levels, which are around 10%. We're currently close to 11% on our fund balance. So there are opportunities to fund this from a variety of ways. We also have some funds available for road projects, which could be earmarked for some of this work if necessary. So this money has already been accounted for, but at this point, $350,000 is what has been allocated to this task force.
Okay. When those monies need to get spent going on in the future, additional monies being funded, does that have to go to referendum, or is that something that's put into the budget?
Only if it exceeds $1 million would it have to go to referendum. The Board of Finance is the ultimate authority on the expenditure of those funds, classically on the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand what the finances are going to be going forward. I could easily see some of these projects, just construction costs. It's expensive. I could easily see them going over $1 million.
Mark, you're absolutely right. If some of the recommendations come out with redoing, and please don't take this as any symbol. This is what we're going to do. That we're going to remake Long Hill Road. Clearly, that kind of funding is not available currently and would have to go to some kind of a referendum or funding vehicle that would identify and secure those kind of funds.
Right. And money could be coming for that with the infrastructure bill in Washington now.
Mark, you're a perfect straight man. We are at the precipice of once in a generational opportunity.
Yes.
On a couple of fronts, the American Rescue Plan being one of them, and allegedly the upcoming infrastructure bill and money. So there would be nothing better than to have shovel-ready projects that this community could take advantage of when those monies are made available. Because let's not forget, we get so little back from both our federal and state income tax money that the opportunity to get some funding for some of these projects may not happen again, as long as definitely as long as I'm in this role.
I'm not that far behind you, Matt. Thanks for clarifying that. And
you're welcome.
I'll have some other infrastructure projects for you to discuss, but we'll talk about that next week.
That's fine. Tuesday morning would be fine at the EDC meeting. Thank you.
Yep, I'll bring them up.
And that's really why we're having this discussion now. Not that we knew that there was going to be a flood of infrastructure money, that's just lucky. But we knew that we wanted to understand what tolerance there was for different types of projects in Guilford, so that when money is available for projects, we already have an understanding of what kinds of treatments to the road are going to be supported and are going to make you feel safer and are going to meet your needs. So this is some good foundational work that will lead to that.
Yeah, and to add to that, if a state project comes through your town and you have a plan that says, this is what we want, you can force them to do that. If you don't have a plan, DOT will just do whatever they want. So you're setting yourself up for any of those types of projects that might come down the pike as well.
Right. And last night I asked the question, had to clarify myself, but we are in line currently for some lot SIP money, local transportation investment
Capital
program.
Improvement
And
Program.
Janice can talk to this better than I can, as well as can Steve. But we have Nut Plains and we also have State Street. So as I asked last night, is there a way for the work that's being done today to inform what we do or might consider doing? I know we have some finite numbers in terms of the construction costs and the allocation from the lot SIP programs, but within that parameter, which obviously includes some measure of a contingency, are there things that we can do with those two projects that would be informed by the work that's currently being done by this task force?
Yeah, Matt, this is Janice. Yeah, I've already been in discussions with the Safe Streets Task Force early on with regards to Nut Plains, which is already under design. The other monies we have is for Goose Lane reconstruction. And some of it, a lot of it is to address just the drainage problems and, you know, overall condition of the roadway. But also to consider, you know, what is the proper width of the road? Is a shoulder desirable and something that can easily be accommodated in the reconstruction project? The realignment of Nut Plains and Goose Lane intersection is part of this. So certainly, you know, feedback from the Safe Streets Task Force is welcomed and has already been, you know, started, at least with Nut Plains. Goose Lane isn't yet under design. And there will also be the opportunity for a public outreach meeting for each of those projects.
Thank you, Janice.
Yeah, I'd just say that I think one of the best things that's happened with this task force is the amount of communication that has occurred between, you know, concerned citizens and town officials. And I think that, you know, those conversations are going to continue. The other thing I would say is there hasn't really been an evaluation of town infrastructure since the 2004 transportation plan. And so, you know, I take the point that hiring a consultant is expensive, but I also think that we were well past our due to do that. And so far, I'm incredibly satisfied with our interactions with the Schmidt Design Group. I think the whole task force would echo that.
Thank you.
Something that's sort of peripheral to all this, but I think should be thought about, is the 9 towns transit system ought to be 10-town transit system, and it would give a lot of other options for people within Guilford as far as transit and other things, rather than just the one bus lane that goes, you know, down the shoreline once every so often. I think, you know, I had brought that up a few years back with another selectman in office, and it never went anywhere. But I think that it would be something to consider again.
Glenn, thank you for that comment. I have had some correspondence with, I think it's Mario Morera from the transit district about coming out this way. I've also had some conversations about extending from the other side, because we're sort of in the middle of the two, between the transit group that handles the shoreline and part of the Connecticut River. There's a 9-town transit district on that side, and then there's the Greater New Haven Transit District, which is Mario Morera's group. So I've had preliminary conversations with both of those organizations. I can't tell you that we're close to any kind of decision, but there are some conversations taking place.
That's good.
That's a really good point, that we haven't spoken that much about transit, but that is also within the purview of this project. So if you have comments and ideas about transit improvements, I was just typing the project website into the chat, and we really hope that you'll engage with some of the tools. We have the community mapping tool. You can email Safe Streets. You can communicate with any of us from the project team via the website as well. Please do so, and tell all your friends and neighbors too as well.
Thank you all.
All right.
I'm smelling dinner.
Yes, it does smell like dinner time.
Well, at least you're home.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
You too.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.